Hi everybody, I'm Anne Ferguson-Smith and I'm the Pro Vice Chancellor for Research and International Partnerships, and it's a real pleasure to be here today to participate in this fireside chat between the University of Cambridge and KPMG about reimagining the world of work. This is also a celebration and a recognition of the joint research program that we're embarking on together that we're very excited about, exploring mental health, well-being, and productivity in the workplace. So in March 2020, as you all know, our world was turned upside down, and many of us, although by no means all, were suddenly working from home, connected to the outside world through our computers, and participating in very different ways of working. So for example, my department, my lab, all of a sudden started working on a 2-shift system, coming in really early in the morning, finishing up really late at night. All kinds of different imaginative, creative ways to try and work differently. And by and large, we all got on with it. Upsides, downsides, there were questions, there are still questions, and a growing number of questions. And so we've really been collectively reevaluating our work and our work practices, our working lives, and thinking about what the future of work might look like for us, what it would, what it could, and what it should look like for us. Difficult questions. So Cambridge and KPMG are embarking on a 5-year future of work partnership to explore trends and global issues affecting the world of work, with the goal of developing interventions and practices that will make a real difference to people's working lives. There are 3 core questions lying at the heart of the Future of the Work program. At the individual level, how will we achieve a resilient and productive workforce? At the organizational level, what will good jobs look like in the future? And at societal level, how will work be meaningful and address societal needs? So Cambridge researchers and KPMG employees are really working together to examine these big issues affecting the modern workforce, to offer practical, research-backed strategies and solutions to working with national governments and individual employers. This research partnership starts with exploring mental well-being and productivity, and will go on to cover a range of topics such as the impact of new technologies, the global distribution of work, the evolving environment, social and corporate governance landscape, and providing evidence-based, actionable outcomes. So tonight, our leading experts are here to discuss the initial research pillar in this partnership on mental well-being and productivity and the workplace. They'll explore why there's a need for this program now and for the future, and how we can generate new knowledge through research to enhance mental well-being, to support productivity, and equip the workplace of the future with interventions that prioritize and promote mental well-being. So thanks to the panel and to all of you for coming and participating today. And I'm going to hand over to Diane Coyle, who's our Bennett Professor of Public Policy and the co-director of the Bennett Institute.
Hopefully my lapel mic will work, and I think it is, so I'll put that there. Thank you very much, Anne, for setting the scene for us. Thank you all for being here. I'm an economist. I'm co-director of the Bennett Institute, which is interdisciplinary, and we have strands of work looking at productivity, looking at well-being. This is a really exciting opportunity for us to take our work forward and look at it in this context. I have a fantastic panel who are going to do all the hard work this evening. So Professor Gordon Harold, Professor of the Psychology of Education and Mental Health, Director of the Andrew and Virginia Rudd Research and Professional Practice Centre in our Education Department. Rachel Hopcroft is a member of the KPMG Executive Committee and Head of Corporate Affairs. And Justine Andrew, a partner at KPMG, Head of Education and Skills and the newly formed University Partnership Office. So as Anne said, this is a broad partnership, and we're focusing on this particular pillar this evening. We're working with John Aston, who's hiding at the back somewhere, and Gordon and I and John will be working together to get this research off the ground. We're at an initial stage, so it's fantastic to have an audience which can ask us questions, can offer us suggestions, can have some input into that at this really early stage. So do feel free to ask questions, do feel free to tweet, and do stay to have a conversation with us after the event as well. So I'm going to turn to each of our panelists to start with to give us a bit of an introduction. And I'm going to start with you, Gordon. And why is this important? Why do we need to think about mental well-being at work?
Thank you, Diane, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to come along this evening. Why is mental well-being important? So if I start with a statistic, or a statement actually, born out of statistics, mental ill health is a leading cause of disability in the UK today. So if you stop for a moment and just reflect on that statement, mental ill health is a leading cause of disability in the UK today, and ask how frequently mental ill health and disability are aligned in the same sentence. Shifting understanding at a societal level as to what mental ill health represents, both at the individual impact level and the societal impact level, is an area that we can do far better in supporting those, particularly in terms of mental ill health support needs. Presently, 1 in 4 children, young people, and adults in the UK experience serious mental health problems. It's estimated annually, this is pre-pandemic, that in the UK it costs just over 100 billion per year in all areas of mental ill health cost and direct impact. It's estimated that globally costs are in escalation or greater than, I should say, $16 trillion per year, estimated by the World Health Organization. By 2030, it's expected that depression will be the leading cause of what are called disability-adjusted life years, time lost to illness, replacing previous indicators of physical ill health, such as ischemic heart disease. Further, 75% of serious psychiatric illness in adulthood is in place before the age of 18 years. Recognizing the importance of understanding, identifying, supporting mental ill health before the age of 18 years is absolutely fundamental if we're going to assist adults, particularly in the workplace context, both in terms of mental ill health and the impacts of mental ill health in terms of workplace outcomes. It's important to say right from the outset that when I'm asked to give a presentation, not this particular event, but when I'm asked to give a presentation on mental health, I ask the person speaking to me to clarify that they'd like me to focus on doing well. And they inevitably say, no, we'd like you to focus on not doing well. And I say, well, that's mental ill health. So if there's one takeaway message from there'll be lots, but one from me, mental health and mental ill health are not the same thing. They're not synonymous terms. And actually, if we're going to advance understanding of how we support mental ill health, we have to first understand how we enhance and promote mental health. The intervention and prevention strategies for mental ill health support are quite distinct, complementary, but quite distinct to strategies aimed at enhancing mental health. So right from the outset, this research pillar as part of this partnership is called mental well-being. And I want to be clear in terms of the focus of our work. We will not just focus on mental health. We will focus on enhancing mental health so that mental health in turn enhances workplace and related outcomes. So let me set the scene in terms of the KPMG context. When I was first asked to speak to the issue around why focus on mental health, mental well-being, actually to a primary KPMG audience, I read a briefing document and it struck me that the modal age, the most frequent age, I've been asked to explain mode a few times, and Sir John Aston here is a statistician, so just to be clear, the most frequent occurring number, the modal age of a KPMG employee in the UK is 28 years. So that struck me, and I thought if you go back to the 2030 statistic, by 2030 depression will be the leading cause of disability-adjusted life years, time lost to illness. Actually, the graduating cohort of 2023, 2024, approximate graduating age of 21 years, will be 28 in 2030. So actually, the time to engage in mental health enhancing and mental ill health supportive strategies is now. Importantly, in terms of that particular cohort, prospective cohort, graduating 2023, 2024 cohorts will likely be the most mental health informed generation of any previous workforce and workplace generation. School-based interventions, school-based programs presently, university-based interventions, university-based programs, will equip that particular generation with knowledge beyond any previous generation. That's a distinct opportunity. So actually developing, equipping, informing a workplace context that can meet that incoming cohort is a huge opportunity. And yet, our research in this space is very, very limited. Programmatic, systematic research is very, very limited. If I make the following statement that well-being is fundamental to productivity, a core question for this pillar, that mental health is fundamental to well-being, that in order to enhance and really maximize the opportunities for the workforce of the future, the workplace of the future has to be mental health and mental ill health informed. There's a lot of speculation around links between mental health, mental well-being, productivity. There's actually very limited evidence, systematic, programmatic, longitudinal evidence. So this pillar, as part of this wider partnership, will endeavour to address that gap. Myself, Diane, and John Aston in the room, and our team members are also here. We'll work together quite uniquely with an interdisciplinary perspective to inform how we can enhance mental health, how we can support mental ill health, and actually draw links between mental well-being and productivity. Thank you.
It was a light bulb moment for me when you drew that distinction between mental ill health and mental health, because I suddenly thought, well, we have a knowledge-based economy, maybe this matters to productivity, and it was an aspect I hadn't thought about before. But Rachel, can I turn to you to give us an introduction from the KPMG perspective, why this was important to you, what the journey has been so far, what you have done so far in terms of mental well-being?
Yes, and thank you, Diane. It's lovely to be here. So I thought I would just start by giving you a bit of a feel for what we do at KPMG, because I'm conscious that not everyone will know who we are and what we do. So we are a global organisation. We've got 236,000 employees right across the world, and we provide tax, legal, audit and advisory services, as I say, right across the world. And in the UK, in our UK business, where Justine and I work, we've got 16,000 UK-based employees, and we're spread across 20 or 21 offices up and down the country. So we've got a really good spread and reach, both here in the UK, but also globally too. And we probably recruit around 1,000 or so graduates or apprentices every year. And as Gordon was saying before, I used to say the average age. I have now corrected my language to the modal age of the organisation is 28. So we're actually a really young organisation. In addition to being quite young, our workforce is also becoming increasingly diverse. So whether that be your more sort of traditional, looking at the protected characteristics, are we gender diverse? Are we ethnically diverse? We're also looking at neurodiversity, and we're looking at socioeconomic diversity as well. And then if I just think about how we worked pre-pandemic, because I think it's quite important for the context of the discussion that we're going to have, we pretty much had all of our staff working in one of those 21 offices up and down the country. And of course, the pandemic, as Anne was saying, forced us all to just work in a very, very different way and very quickly as well. So we now operate a hybrid model of working, and I know lots of businesses are doing this, but we've been sort of testing and learning as we go, talking to our staff, surveying them, engaging them on what they think works. And we've alighted now on a model where we have a couple of days a week in the office or with our clients, and a couple of days a week working from home. And so that's the sort of model that we're going for. But of course, this is flushing out lots and lots of other issues, including the issue of mental well-being, mental health. And so that is a lens on which we look at this problem too, how we are now working in the post-pandemic world. And then if I think about the question that you also posed, Diane, why are we doing this work? Well, Gordon just set the scene beautifully there with what's going on at the macro level. For us, because of what Gordon was saying there about the future workforce highly likely arriving to us as new employees with mental health problems, we are quite under-equipped as a business, I think, to really deal with that. And so what we're hoping this partnership will give us is ways to better understand that problem, but crucially, what then to do about it. And professional services, our sector, is a demanding one. I mean, it is a very demanding environment. And if you're a graduate or an apprentice joining us, you'll usually be undertaking some form of professional qualification while you also work. So we do ask an enormous amount of our colleagues, and that pressure and that demand can also create additional problems too. So we're really keen to find out what works. And as I'm sure we'll get going in the discussion, we've been trying and testing different things during this last period. Some of it we think has worked, but we don't know that it has definitely worked. So we're very excited about doing something that will be underpinned by academic rigour. And hopefully we can then talk to our clients and to other businesses about what actually works rather than what we think might work.
And you've raised some really interesting issues there. These young people arriving into a different pattern of working than we experienced when we started work.
Yes.
And how do they learn that what they need to know, corporate culture and so on. I think there's some really interesting questions. Yeah. But you set up nicely, Justine, there, because I was going to ask you, Justine, about why the university partnership, why that's important, and how you envision this working. How are we going to do it?
Yeah, thank you all, and lovely to be here. I was trying to think of something analogous to mental well-being and the issues that we're talking about, and at 52, not the modal age of KPMG, I'm old enough to remember people smoking in cinemas, in trains, in restaurants, in the office. We probably had KPMG ashtrays, I imagine. But in my generation, there's been a seismic generational shift in that. And that's based on research. It's been based on communicating evidence in a really compelling way. And it's been based on legislation changing. There's 2 million fewer smokers in the UK now than there were in 2009, with all of the benefits that brings. And actually, when you're listening to those statistics that Gordon was quoting around the impact of the mental health pandemic, then actually what we're looking for here is something as seismically generational as that response to smoking, I think. That's going to take change, it's going to take courage, and it's going to take collaboration, which is one of the reasons that we're doing it. I think the case for change is compelling. You couldn't really argue with those statistics that Gordon talked about. I doubt there's anyone in this room that hasn't been impacted by a mental wellbeing issue themselves or people they know. I have. But what do we do about it? And I think trying to understand the organisational response to that question is at the heart of this partnership, Diane, in answer to your question. And as Anne said, what we're thinking about this is on the individual level, on this organisational level, and at the societal level. And at the individual level, people's expectations are massively different from how they were pre-pandemic. But how do we as an organisation then create an environment that supports that resilient and productive workforce? How do organisations prioritise mental well-being with the finite resources that they have, and when they have to prioritise and make decisions about investments? And at a sort of societal level, what is the evidence base that demonstrates supporting mental well-being, as we've all said, will be a driver of economic growth and productivity? What are the policy levers that need to be pulled? And some of those interplays between those elements can be contradictory, and there are tensions. So thinking about this next generation of the workforce that we've said are coming over the hills at us at speed, this informed generation, they're on the whole going to be entering organisations that remain fundamentally unchanged from how they were pre-pandemic and even, decades before that. Our clients, they're worried about productivity, about growth, about responding to the issues that are in front of them. But they're also worried, it's a top 3 boardroom issue that we saw coming out in recent surveys, about talent and skills, about having the people to drive those ambitions, about equipping them with the skills they need now and in the future. But when I looked at our CEO survey, this is a global survey that we did, all of the CEOs surveyed said, yep, absolutely, the last 2 years has given us a boon in productivity, in collaboration, in hiring. But 62% of those same CEOs said they see the future work mode to be in office. So how do they reconcile those things? Because they're referring back and they're going back to systems that they knew worked before. But what we need to do with this research is inform that view of this new generation that's coming at us at pace. So I think organisations have a choice to continue to operate as we have done historically, or to use this as a pivot point to reshape and restructure how we do things. We know mental well-being is top of the client's agenda. 85% of people in our HR survey recently said it was, but only 28% of them said they had the capability, the skills and the understanding to know what works. There's a big evidence gap there that Gordon talked about. And we want this partnership to be at the forefront of developing that evidence base. That's the absolute critical thing, the link between mental well-being and productivity. What interventions work? Not holistically, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. What works for different people and at what time and what stage in their career? What's the data that supports that? And I suppose, what's the blueprint for an organisation that puts mental well-being at its heart as a key driver and looks to build that in a systemic way, not superficially? That's going to be really important, I think, going forward. That's going to require courage, and I'm really proud, actually, that KPMG is here talking about this, that we're working with global colleagues, and that KPMG UK is opening up our people, our data, our offices to researchers from Cambridge to build that evidence base. We want to be at the forefront of this debate and provide insight and evidence to our own organisation, to our leadership, our clients, and more broadly. We're going to do to ourselves, we're going to build on what we've done, but we're going to use ourselves as a test and learn. And we're going to share our journey with all of you here and with our clients as well. And that's why collaboration is really critical, because we're consultants and we like to think we're clever people, but we don't know everything. We don't have all the answers. And we need someone else to look at us with that critical eye and build that external view. And that's what the partnership, I think, is going to bring. So I think we're at a transition phase, a pivot point. And like all transitions, we have a choice. And that's going to require a seismic generational shift, I think, in the way that we look at this mental well-being issue. It's going to require change, it's going to require courage, it's going to require collaboration. And as an organisation, we're facing into that change. And we want to absolutely play our part in informing which direction we go, our clients go, and, without sounding too grand, the societal impact of this as well. So we're really excited about it.
We're excited too. I'm going to put the same question to you, Gordon, about, from our perspective, this is quite a distinctive partnership, so what are we going to bring to the party?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was reflecting on this. I was actually asked the question within the university, how did you, Diane and John, get together? Did you know each other before you joined the university, Gordon? I should say I joined the university in July 2020, right slap bang at the outset of the pandemic. So sitting from my desk in Cardiff is my interface with the university over the past 2.5 years while we're trying to move as a family. When I was presented with the opportunity to look at this question, mental health, well-being in the workplace, I work at the coalface of mental illness, coalface of young people's mental illness in particular. And I see the day-to-day lived experience realities of mental ill health as such experiences influence young people, families, and wider lives. And actually what has been a product of the pandemic is a conversation around evidence. Who would have thought 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, if I asked you to wear a face mask, because I think it's good for you to wear a face mask where it's healthy, you would say, I'm not going to wear a face mask. In a short amount of time, and Sir John Aston is here in the room, who's helped with this whole behavioural change at a societal level, we now recognise that wearing a face mask is not just better for us, but better for others. An entire shift in behaviour. Now, if we can shift behaviour at that level, and pre-pandemic, the emerging pandemic was mental ill health, surely we have an absolutely unique opportunity to have a conversation at a national level across all sectors of society about mental health. Mental health whereby we destigmatize conversation about mental ill health. If we can infuse the conversation around mental health, and it's an enhancement, not just let's talk about mental health and feel positive. Actually, how do we infuse society with knowledge from childhood into adolescence, into early adulthood, into adulthood and later stages of life, with knowledge that informs mental health and well-being? That is a huge opportunity. That does not negate the importance of supporting mental ill health and those at risk of mental ill health. But I would say schools, universities, workplace, and other sectors of society are very uninformed at a substantive intervention, prevention level about not what mental health is or mental ill health is, but what causes mental ill health, what supports and promotes mental health. So the conversation has to move away from just the focus on what is depression, what is anxiety, what is schizophrenia, what are other areas of mental ill health, to actually what factors promote risk and then development of that risk in terms of adverse outcomes, but also how do we support and interrupt and engage with those, working with those at risk to remediate that risk. That's a profound question. I'm a scientist. Diane is a scientist. Sir John Aston is a scientist. We're given the question, does mental health enhance productivity? I went away, as you would expect me to do, did a literature review. I couldn't find anything that convincingly addressed that question. So we don't have actually an evidence base to inform that question, if not answer that question. How do we measure mental health? How is mental health measured in the workplace? I've seen questions that tap into well-being, but I've seen very few structured assessments that tap into what I would recognize as indicators of poor mental health or mental health. Productivity, in my conversations with Diane, actually, what do we mean by productivity? How do we measure productivity? And how do we join up that association between mental health, well-being, productivity, where we get a single-headed arrow increasingly moving from one to the other? To do that, we need data. We need research design, fundamental to everything, and data. And that's what John, myself, and Diane bring to the table, together with our research teams. It's been an absolute genuine pleasure to work over the past 12 months as we get the sort of platform of this pillar up and running. Every credit to KPMG, they've been absolutely fantastic to work with. Let me say at the outset, this isn't just a Cambridge for KPMG opportunity or partnership. This is a Cambridge for wider society opportunity through this partnership to inform a substantive question of societal relevance. How do we enhance mental health? So that's what we bring. The platform, the network, the environment that is the University of Cambridge genuinely enhances what we can do. We intend this to be a university-wide opportunity, bringing all different perspectives, complementary and distinct perspectives, disciplinary perspectives to the table. One fundamental objective, informing that question through data, through careful research. Does mental health, well-being enhance productivity? If so, how? And how do we sustain, in terms of this research, that ongoing association for the good?
So I think I'd underline that last point, actually. There are a lot of people who believe that well-being affects productivity and campaign for it, but it's the causality. It's what are the levers and what can you do about it, and how can you have that conversation with policymakers, with employers if things need to change. Rachel, there might be people who would say, but it's not the employer's job to get into questions about employee mental well-being. How would you respond to that?
Well, I'm sure there are people that think that, but it's certainly not our view. I think we feel very strongly that it is absolutely our role to think about how we can enhance as much as we possibly can the experience that all of our employees have when they come to work for us, and their mental health and well-being is a component part of that. What we don't know, though, is what works. And we've been, like lots of businesses actually, we've been trialling different things over the last period. And some, we think, have had a direct impact on well-being. But as Gordon was saying, we haven't been able to sort of create that causality. So
could you give us some examples?
Yeah, so we did something in the summer that we called Jumpstart Friday, which is a very sort of corporate term. But in effect, we were giving all of our colleagues Friday afternoons off from lunchtime. So you were in effect over the summer months working a 4.5-day week. And we'd done this in the past, pre-pandemic and pre the focus on wellbeing, but we'd always said that you could use your Jumpstart provision provided you'd finished your work. And so people felt, well, my work's never finished. You know, I'm never going to get to the end of my in-tray or through my to-do list. And so take up for it was quite low. The way we did it this summer was to say, everyone's finishing early at 1 o'clock on a Friday. And we got leaders to role model it. So it became a real focal and talking point across the organisation. And people felt as though they had permission to take it. And not only did they have permission to take it, but we were all talking about it. So we were saying, oh, how are you using your Jumpstart and what are you going to do? And it created a sense of permission in the organisation. And in the end, we had about 9,000 people using it. So I think what was happening sort of within the organisation was that people were organising rotas and making it work for individual teams where you might need to work on a Friday, but you could take that time back perhaps another time in the week. So we think that works, but we don't know that for sure. So we'd love to be able to really test it. And there's this 4-day working week pilot going on at the national level, isn't there? And we've sort of been toying with, could we be an organisation that goes to a 4-day working week? We're not quite there yet. But again, I would love to pilot that and see whether or not that has a direct impact on well-being and productivity. Yes. So that's just one example of we've done some things that haven't worked quite so well as well, which I'm also happy to talk about. But that's definitely one that stands out as, I think, a good thing that we've done.
Fascinating pilot. Go ahead.
Just to say on that, I mean, it's not an atypical statement you just made. The evidence around interventions, again, in workplace, there are just a multitude of interventions, workplace interventions, with very nice sounding titles, names. Very few have been evaluated. So what we bring, I'll try and join the conversation a bit, what we bring, myself, John, Diane, is a degree of scientific rigor. Yes. Not just to test something, but actually to design how we would test something. And that's what I will say about KPMG to date. Projects we've been brought into has been right at the outset, right at the design stage. And to date, there's been nothing but an engaged, interested, educated response to our advice. Why would we do that? Well, here's why. That makes sense. And as a result of doing X, we might be able to conclude Y. But actually, the evidence base we have around interventions at a workplace level, particularly as you're transitioning into work, age 18, 19, 20, 21 plus, that key age group out of university into the workplace is next to zero. And yet we know it's one of the most fundamentally significant risk periods for poor mental health, is that transition.
But for me as an economist, the question the 4-day pilot raises is, if you're paying people the same and you're taking a day a week away, how are you going to deliver the 25% productivity increase that implies? Mm. So joining up the dots to productivity is my interest in it.
Yeah, definitely.
This was probably for either Justine or Rachel. I think it was you, Justine, you raised the trend towards working from home, hybrid working. There are other trends going on as well, which I presume will affect a company like KPMG, such as AI, routinizing some of the things that people do. How do you see that playing into our joint endeavour?
Yeah, absolutely. And your question as well earlier, it's linked to, isn't it, about why should organisations care about this? Well, I think organisations need to care about it because, especially a people organisation, retention of talent is really important, and being purposeful about thinking about digitisation and the impact of AI, and everyone's talking about their digital strategies and what they need to do and how work is changing. If you think about our core product of audit, that is going to be impacted by AI going forward, right? There will be some things that can be done by automation that was done previously by people. What does that mean for the training, for the leadership, for the people who are coming up through the business who used to learn by doing? If we're taking that away, we have to be very purposeful in thinking about both the training but also the roles for those people. And that gives us opportunity as well as a challenge, right? What else could those people be doing? How else could they be supporting our business? So I think when we talk about some of these systemic changes, I don't mean embedding things. I think it's actually going to be much more agile and much more flexible in terms of a workforce than perhaps as an organisation we've had before. So I think the audit one is a really good example in terms of being very purposeful about how we think about the roles that those people will be doing. And also there's an interesting question just linked to what Anne was saying about good jobs, is because we can automate, should we? And that's an interesting debate that we're going to have. There will be some elements of the role that actually we think, yes, we could, but that is critical for people coming up through the organisation for learning, for example. So it's being very purposeful, I think, about those interventions.
So I think learning is a really interesting area, particularly for the kind of young people coming into work. I grew up in Lancashire, and in the cotton industry, there was this saying, sitting with Nelly, learn tacit knowledge. You just learn from somebody on the job. How does that work in this kind of environment? So what is your thinking, maybe Rachel, about learning and corporate culture?
Yeah, it's definitely the big question, because as I was saying, we are operating this hybrid model where we're in the office or at client sites for a few days a week and then at home for a few days a week. We have come up with the idea that if you are coming to the office, that you do so for purposeful reasons, a bit like Justine was saying. And so we'll create a lot more meaning and engagement for our employees when they do come to the office. Now that takes a lot more coordination and effort and thinking than it did pre-pandemic, because everyone would just turn up for work and you sit at your desk, and then, you know, if you had a question to ask Gordon, you go, hey Gordon, can I just have you for 5 minutes? How do we create a sense of a learning environment when we're together less? And do our younger colleagues that are coming through and joining us, who, as you were saying before, aren't as familiar with the corporate culture, how do they then tap into that? So is it okay just to randomly phone people on Teams and say, hey, I've got a question? Or are there new ways in which you have to learn to be able to be taught?
And do younger people do it differently?
And
Because
do they do it
we're all
differently?
of a certain age here.
Exactly. I mean, I certainly learned by the, what was the saying, the Nelly?
Sitting with Nelly.
Sitting with Nelly. I certainly learned sitting with Nelly. I started life in the civil service, and it was very much about being in the room when it happened, to quote Hamilton. But, you know, if you weren't in the room, you didn't get the experience and the knowledge and the learning. Now, of course, that's not the case anymore. So it's definitely top of mind, and we're trying to learn and evolve as we go.
Gordon, Rachel raised earlier this point about diversity and the different kinds of diversity that are of concern. And there is, I think, good evidence that a diverse body of people will make better decisions or tackle problems more effectively. What's the kind of evidence from your world about how different groups of people are affected in terms of their mental well-being at work? It must be tougher for some than others.
Yeah, it's interesting. This might sound a contentious statement. Mental illness does not discriminate. Everybody's at risk. Some groups experience distinctly greater risk than others. But actually, illness is pervasive and often hidden among those groups least likely to be associated with anything less than perfection. We know young people are at particular risk. Particular ethnic groups are at particular risk. Women actually consistently in the workplace score higher in terms of mental illness indicators than men. We know certain age groups are at elevated risk, particularly actually later stage career. Entry and later stage career, higher risk. I want to bring the word learning, Diane, if I may, into this. I've just think a little bit about the AI question, and I was struck that I'm of the same age as Justine, so I'm not modal. I might be modal at Cambridge, I don't know, but I'm not modal at KPMG. When I want to feel better about all things digital or AI, I speak to young people. I have the benefit of speaking to young people. I work with adolescents primarily. A few years ago, all questions around is the digital world impacts on young people's mental health, very topical presently. But actually, to feel better about digital world impacts on young people's mental health, I speak to young people because they actually know an awful lot more than I do in terms of that particular world. Likewise, in the AI world. Again, I literally had a small-scale study just a few weeks ago, and I raised this with 16 to 18-year-olds and their teachers. Which group were more concerned about AI? The teachers. It'll replace the teacher, etc., as compared to it might enhance the learning experience in the classroom. Yeah. So we have to look at our questions specifically as to how those questions will inform the group where we are working with. That's the incoming cohort of future employees. And supporting those present, that's not abandoning those currently in the workforce, but actually having knowledge-led guidance around these impending change-based domains. When it comes to learning at any age, guess what? Mental health is absolutely fundamental to learning. Poor mental health will interrupt learning, reduce sleep, lifestyle, anxiety, interrupts cognition, interrupts learning. So actually enhancing mental health, supporting mental health, equipping mental health will enhance learning. Now, joining those two up in a workplace context, both for the present workforce generation and for an incoming workforce generation, that's where the opportunity sits. That's in large part what this initiative is. And also in terms of the diversity question, we have to recognize that some individuals, groups, are at elevated risk. Doesn't mean it's inevitable that that risk will be expressed. But what can we do in advance to offer support to those groups that we know are probabilistic, elevated risk to reduce that risk? We have to start asking those questions.
So I've got one more question. I'm going to putting the audience on notice that I'm going to turn to you next for your comments and questions. So get ready for that. And it's again to Rachel and Justine about what your clients say, and to what extent is this interest coming from clients as well as the organisation itself?
Hugely. I mean, yeah, it's as we said before, it's absolutely a top order of issue. People are focusing on it. If you want to grow your business, if you want to improve productivity, there is this phrase, a war for talent. It's overused at the moment. But it's a focus on retaining people, on looking after your people, on recruiting people. And as an employer, it's important that you make your workplace then open and attractive to this generation that's coming down. So it's an absolute imperative for our clients. But there isn't this corporate playbook. There isn't an evidence base that says you should do this. There's some really interesting work going on. We've recently looked at some pathfinders who are really looking at this issue in a very holistic way. Gordon was involved in some of the research. So looking at all aspects of wellbeing for their employers. So financial, mental, work, societal, all of those issues together. But those are pathfinder organisations. And we want to add to that. We want all organisations to be able to look at the evidence base that we've got. So it's an absolute key issue for clients.
And I think there's, I hate to quote one of our competitors, but they did do a very good report on this, where they sort of calculated the cost of mental ill health to the economy and came up with the stat that it costs UK employers £56 billion a year. And then said for every pound that employers spent, they'd get £5 back in reduced absence or staff turnover and that sort of thing. So there's a harder-nosed sort of, commercial imperative to it as well.
That's what I like to hear as an economist. Okay, over to the audience. Thank you. And there's Steph behind you too. We've got a couple of roving mics, and the first question is in the middle here. I like to try and make the people with the mics run as far as they can around the room. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is such an interesting topic, I think, and I really welcome this research. One of the things, this is an observation, I guess, one of the things that strikes me is that we kind of congratulated ourselves when we made the sudden shift from the way we used to work to remote working when lockdown was introduced. But that way of working pre-lockdown had been developed over years, and there were sort of very small incremental changes to it. And the technology was there, and we were now using it and embracing it in a much different way. I think now things are much more complicated. As we enter into a hybrid world, which I think is here to last. I don't think we'll ever go back, contrary to what your CEOs and survey actually wanted. I mean, that's kind of safe to think that. We won't go back, and I think hybrid working causes huge amounts of stress. My own little case study today is that, you know, I started off this morning working from home. I travelled to my office, I worked there. I did a call in a cafe, continued it on the train coming up here. I'm here, and I'm now going to go back and probably do some emails on the train as well. And I think that's the environment that we've now got to really focus on in terms of how we can maintain mental health through that, because we absorb that stress and we think, well, it's working. And I think the big difference now is that everyone has their own take on what hybrid working means, and they can define their own way of working in a hybrid form. And we don't know what that is, so we have to kind of guess it and work it out for ourselves. So I think anything you can do to kind of examine that and actually perhaps reinforce the point that this is here to stay now, and it will continue to change, and we will never get back to a steady state that we had before. I think that'll be most welcome.
So I think, Rachel, you said that you were converging on a hybrid pattern, is that correct?
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what you've said there, certainly anecdotally, I think. One of the things that our younger employees have told us is that they actually struggle more without boundaries. So what we thought people wanted was total flexibility, and the hybrid world would allow you to do that. But exactly what you've just described, if you're quite junior and quite new, you kind of need more rules and more support to make hybrid work. And so I think we've been a little bit surprised by that, that actually what people want is flexibility, but in a controlled way. So I think there's something about boundaries, boundary setting, and also, as you were pointing out there, for some people, hybrid means just work anywhere, all the time. And, you know, you can just make it part of your life. And if you're still working at 11 o'clock at night, well, if you put your kids to bed and had a couple of hours off, then that's all fine. And work just becomes this sort of stream. For other people, that is highly stressful. You know, if their bosses are sending emails at 11 o'clock at night because it suits them, the impact of that on a more junior colleague is perhaps not felt. So there's definitely lots in what you've just said that we're definitely sort of thinking about and considering. And it's why we went for 2 to 3 days in the office and 2 to 3 days at home, because it did give more context and boundaries than perhaps some other of our competitors, you know, one of whom has said, we want everyone back in the office 5 days a week, and that's just the way it is. And another said, work's a thing you do, not a place you go, so you can do it from anywhere. So we've sort of alighted somewhere in the middle of our sector, but it remains to be seen, I think, as to whether it's absolutely right. You know, we're not totally nailed on it, but for now, this is the way that we're learning.
There's an interesting analogy, isn't there, with universities, actually, at the start of the pandemic, who pivoted very quickly to put learning online. And that was very positive, but there's a very stark difference, and university colleagues, please correct me, I think, between just putting something online, so doing what you did in the office remotely, putting the lectures that you did in the theatre onto a system, and really thinking deeply about what does remote learning look like, what does remote hybrid working look like, and I think just building on that, that's exactly what we want to do. We want to think deeply about what it looks like and exactly provide some of that evidence.
If I can just add to your point, I'm really struck when we use the phrase workplace and work and hybrid working. Actually, one of the biggest fractures to my generation, our generation sitting here, in terms of the workplace, is the interface that work now has with family and other areas of life that previously would have been separated out or distinct. I go to work, I go home, I spend time with family, I have work-life balance. Actually, the complete collapse of boundaries between workplace, family, school is absolutely, as you say, irreversible. You know, my workplace is my office at home, which also, you know, in mid-pandemic, it was split in half literally for my son to do his online, you know, schoolwork, homework, and it's still the case. So I don't go to work, I'm at work while I'm at home, while I'm with family, while I'm trying to exercise, Now, as a mental health specialist, that is not sustainable across all of our relevant ages here. And in large part, a key question for us, actually, John, myself, and Diane, is that question. How do we better understand those links? How do we enhance support those links? Workplace surveys will put mental health and family relationships as the top 2 priority topics in terms of concerns about their work. And that's got significant implications: productivity, sustainability, recruitment into the workplace, retention in the workplace, and actually preparation for the workplace. It's no longer you go to work. We know nothing, really.
I think we all recognise this syndrome. In the middle here. Thanks, Steph.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, everybody. Gordon, you mentioned sleep briefly and the relationship between sleep, well-being, and learning. And I just wondered if you could share some thoughts that you might have on how you might approach measuring sleep, and also maybe if you could leverage the growing adoption of wearables, for example, and maybe account for this boundaryless work and the opportunities to measure some of those signals using that technology.
Great question. I mean, there's a whole emerging field of sleep science. It's been around a long time, but actually really, really sort of has gained some momentum and traction over the past probably 5 or so years. I'm going to say something very obvious. Sleep is absolutely fundamental to all aspects of life. I have 2 children. I can tell you I haven't slept properly for about 21 years. But nonetheless, I function.
You wait till you get a dog.
It's an area that is probably less understood than an area that's already little understood, which is mental health. Enhancing, supporting the ability to sleep, to rest. You don't sleep, you don't rest if you're anxious, if you're stressed. All the guidelines, 2 teenage children, I would say, okay, we're going to come off our mobile phone in a certain time, we're going to try and avoid blue light, all of that sort of stuff. But if you're sitting staring at your screen, or your phone is close at hand, your computer's close at hand, you don't switch off. And the brain science behind that is that you don't switch off. And we know that the neurobiological processes linked to not switching off directly linked to depressogenic neurobiological processes, serotonin-related processes. So actually, if we're switched on from the moment we don't get up, we're awake kind of 24-ish 7. That is not sustainable. So again, I'll let Justine and Rachel comment on this. It's what methodologies are employed by employers to make sure you are switched on. If you're working from home, the hybrid model, if you're working from home, is your time recorded? Your time sitting in front of the screen recorded? Do you feel you can switch off? If you don't feel you can switch off, that is not interested around mental health. I'm a huge fan of getting more and more research and science out around sleep, not just the going to sleep, but how we can support people going to sleep.
Can I just comment on that
sure,
as well?
Of course, yeah.
So
yeah.
we've got 2 things that are helping us a little bit with this, because for all of the reasons that Gordon said, we definitely think sleep is very important, but also that sort of rest time, thinking time, reflection time, disconnecting from devices and from the churn of meetings and endless Zooming or Teamsing or whatever platform you use. One thing that we've put on our Microsoft software is something called Viva Insights, and it delivers for you a compilation at the end of the week of exactly how much time you've had away from the screen. And that's just been an amazing way for certainly in my leadership team, we talk about it. And are we giving ourselves enough time to disconnect, to think, to reflect? What impact is that having on us? And the second thing that we're going to be starting in the new year, which Gordon and Diane and John have been helping us with, is we're going to do a randomised controlled trial using an Apple Watch that will give to a certain number of colleagues, and sleep will be one of the things that we look at as part of that. So we will have a bit more evidence on that side of things as well.
Can I say one other thing? Just
very briefly.
Very briefly, just on that. It's interesting. just the wearables point you mentioned to me, and again, it's an area that is just severely limited in terms of robust, rigorous data. I mean, I'll give you a funny line of that. I was a runner in my earlier years. I stopped wearing Garmin watches, GPS watches, because they told me how slow I was running as I got a bit older. The use of wearables in terms of data Where the wearable is the methodology, i.e. it's gathering the data, and we can look at those data relative to real, lived experiences, great. Where the wearable is deemed to be the sort of device of change, we don't know. And that's part of the question we're trying to ask.
I never felt I needed a smartwatch to know how slowly I was.
Or how badly you were sleeping.
Yeah.
A question at the front here, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm curious how professional service organizations can sort of balance client demands with interventions into improving mental health. So I used to work in PwC actually, and I found that the organization often we had summer working hours, for example, but we also had these caveats that we had to have our work completed and client demands and statutory deadlines met before we could take these interventions. So I'm just wondering what you guys think about balancing these two conflicting priorities.
Great question.
Well, I think it's $1 million question, isn't it? And I suppose, as I said when I was talking earlier, there is an inherent tension in some of those things. But that's because perhaps as organisations we're carrying on doing the things that we did previously. And so what we're hoping that this will do is give us that empirical evidence base to say we are going to have to adapt, we are going to have to change. If we don't, then we will not serve this new workforce that's coming at us at speed well as organisations. And we need people, 1,000 people, there's a commercial imperative as well. Totally. So that is the absolute question. I think we are going to have to adapt and change. And it's finding the right balance between that. We are, as Rachel absolutely said, a professional services organisation that's a high-performing culture. But we need to find the right balance. And that's what we're hoping that this will support us with doing.
Definitely, and I think two other builds on that. One is our clients are struggling with this as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So actually conversations with them about the interventions we're making have actually been really positive. Yeah. So, we are introducing Finish Early Fridays, and we'd like you to be supportive of that. Because the likelihood is they're doing similar things with their workforces too. So I think there's a sort of collaboration point about that. And the second thing, you mentioned the sort of statutory requirement. There's a big conversation to be had with regulators about this, because it's just not, it's not possible, I don't think, for the regulatory environment not to reflect this too. So those two other things I think are really important to this.
Thank you. So Justine, I have a question for you. How do you think that the increased reliance on artificial intelligence will affect the focus on mental well-being, especially if there's a little financial investment needed to get much higher productivity gains for AI? And then Rachel, outside of the workplace, there are a lot of things that affect the mental health of the employee. To what extent do you think any intervention would be helpful if there are other factors in a person's life that are toxic? How do you control for such externalities? And then Gordon, do you think there's a distinction between need and want in mental health conversation? Is the focus on mental health becoming an excuse for bad behavior? Thank you.
That's 3 questions in one. Very efficient.
Very efficient.
AI, Justine.
Thank you. So your question was, how does the organisation balance the investment in AI against the investment in mental wellbeing? That sort of prioritisation point. Yeah, I think, well, it's something that we hope this research will uncover. But organisations are having to make those choices all the time, aren't they? And when we're thinking about the future of audit, the future of our organisation, digitisation, it's got to be both. You can put in the kit, you can put in a system, you can put in AI, but if you don't look after the people, these things are very rarely IT projects. If you don't put in the associated change and look after the people, then they will fail. So it's about balancing both of those investments. I don't think it's an either or. They have to go together. It's IT plus the culture, the people, and the change that's going to support you getting the productivity gains from that IT. I don't think it's an either or.
Rachel, it was how do you both control for and I guess be sensitive to other things that are going on in people's lives outside work?
Yeah, so I think you said the potentially toxic things going on in people's lives. I think what the last 2 years have shown us is that it's more important than it's ever been to be much, much closer to your people as an employer. So to really understand them, to know what's going on in their lives as far as they want to tell you, but to create the conditions that they can tell you those things, I think is very important and will continue to become more important, actually. We therefore need to equip leaders to be able to have those sorts of conversations, because it doesn't come necessarily easily to everyone. So that's point one. The second point is where people do things outside of work that really give them joy and give them life and make them feel human, supporting and encouraging people to do that. So normally on a Monday night, I go to a pop choir, which sounds really cheesy, but I love it. It gives me so much energy and joy and life. And my team know that that's what I do. And so I'm only interrupted on a Monday night if it's absolutely essential, because it's my tiny bit of the week that I protect for myself. And again, I think employers need to just recognise and support people to be able to do those fun things, as well as support the things that might be going on that are more difficult.
I'm going to ask you to hold yours, Gordon, if that's okay. In the interest of taking another question from the neglected side of the room, if anybody has one. Towards the back, I can see a green arm, but not who it's attached to.
Hi.
Oh, it's Anna.
Thank you. This was really eye-opening and interesting. So I wonder how research into mental well-being at work by with an organization like KPMG might change the way perhaps you practice also advising to your clients. I mean, it's been kind of addressed, but here's the thought that, I mean, the rise of gig economy and the rise of extremely, brutal practices like zero-hour contracts are often driven by the advice that employers get from consultancies and professional services. And I mean, clearly, if you believe that employers pay twice or even more for poor mental health of their employees, then you wouldn't advise to them sort of to adopt zero-hour contracts, for example, or other incredibly brutal practices like finding out on the day when you've already arranged childcare that you're not going to actually have the job, the work that you've been asked to do. So, I mean, I wonder if it is a really broad, big change that is being asked, right, including of the practices of evaluation and appraisal by which, so it's not just how you treat your employees, it's also what you advise to other people to adopt. Is that too much to ask? How do you feel?
Gordon also wants to come in on this one, but
okay, do you want to go first?
So I'll try to join up the previous question with that. It's really interesting, actually. Mental health and bad behaviour, 0 hours contracts, stress, and the examples you just provided. Shifting the conversation on mental health to recognise that mental health is real is absolutely fundamental. So poor mental health is on the increase. People say more reporting, it's just greater awareness. Evidence recently showed that 7 to 9-year-olds, increasing rates of self-harm reported to GP surgeries. So we have objective measures of mental illness, and mental illness rates are going up. Hands up here who would feel comfortable saying, I'm not coming to work today because I'm depressed. I'm not going to do X because I'm stressed. I'm concerned about my ability to deliver my job today because I've got childcare responsibilities and I don't know what's going to happen to work. I'm very stressed. If you take the human resources interface, what implications does a change in the conversation around mental health and mental illness have for a human resources interface? Supporting versus performance managing. So I know we're coming to the close of our conversation, but I really want to frame that question. Before we can really impact the workplace around mental health and mental ill health change, we have to change the conversation that actually mental health and mental ill health and impacts on productivity, impacts on ability to engage in meaningful workplace delivery in terms of purpose and role. It's fundamentally linked to mental health. And we have to move away from the negative packaging of mental health. Mental ill health is bad behavior. I'm a developmental psychologist. It wasn't that long ago that it was purported that attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is just bad behavior. It's not. And it's shifting that popular misunderstanding with evidence, which is what myself, John, and Diane will bring to the table, to actually give traction to the conversation about how do we make things better.
Yeah, and that underpins all of our client work. just for the avoidance of doubt, we are driven by purpose. We're driven by a very clear set of values. When we're talking to clients, we're looking at sustainable change, right? And those sorts of things that you talked about, they're not sustainable. It's not the advice that we give our clients. If a client wishes to grow, they're looking at productivity increases, you have to look after your workforce. Mm-hmm. That's at the heart of what we talk to our clients about. Mark's at the back of the room. He leads our client work on people and change. I'm sure he would support that comment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be our perspective, and also the evidence would show that that's the right way for people to engage in organisations. So yeah, I think we would.
We have come to the end of formal proceedings, and I don't want to stand between people and the drinks and canapes downstairs. But I hope you'll carry on the conversation. We'll be there, so corner any of us to talk more about it. But for now, thank you all very much for coming here. Thank you for the great questions. Thank you to the great panel. And we'll carry on the conversation. Stay in touch.